Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order this meeting of Bloomington Common Council's Sustainable Development Committee. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. It is Tuesday, March 31st, 2020. We are meeting via Zoom. I am joined on the dais, such as it is, by my fellow committee members, Council Member Stephen Volan. Could you wait? Everybody knows. Okay. Council Member Matt Flaherty. And it's possible that Councilmember Susan Sandberg will be joining us at some point, but we're not sure of that yet. So thank you to everyone for being here. Thank you to Mr. Stephen Lucas, our Deputy Attorney Administrator, for overseeing being our Zoom Sherpa this evening. So I'm going to do a little bit of a preview, and then Stephen will provide some instructions, and then we will dive in. So first of all, I will offer some comments. We'll turn the screen at that point over to Alex Crowley, Director of Economic and Sustainable Development for the city. We will have opportunities for questions and comments from committee members, opportunities for comment from the public. We will then come back to the committee for final comments, and then we'll adjourn. So that's just a quick overview. And Stephen, do you want to take us through logistics for Zoom?
Sure. So a lot of the folks on this meeting were, I think, at the council meeting last Wednesday and kind of saw how that proceeded. But for those who are new or for those who need a reminder, I will be trying to facilitate the meeting by activating or deactivating folks' audio and video as needed. We've got relevant city staff and the committee members activated, along with some of the working group folks who are here to talk about a report. So if anyone finds themselves muted when they shouldn't be, or wants to make a request, the chat function, hi Susan, I think I've unmuted you, if it's coming up now maybe. Use the chat function to let me know. The chat will go directly to me as meeting host, and I should be able to see that and respond accordingly. So for any members of the public who are experiencing any technical issues, and when we get to public comment, let me know that you'd like to make a comment over the chat function, and I'll be monitoring that as the meeting proceeds.
Susan is still muted.
Are there any questions for Stephen?
Just a disclaimer. If I cut out, it's no offense, but I've been having intermittent internet problems all day. So I may be here for just a little while, and then if I'm out.
Good luck, Susan.
So,
and one last note, if you mute yourself, I'll have to manually unmute you. So for all the folks that are muted now, that's fine. But when you know you're going to want to talk, either send me a chat or just raise your hand and I'll unmute you. I think it just sends you an invite to unmute yourself at some point in the road, so you can leave it unmuted or muted until you need to. So I'll do my best.
thank you, Stephen. Any questions for Stephen? Okay, let's dive in. I want to start out and just provide some context and some framework for this meeting tonight, how it fits into some work that's been done, how it fits into some meetings that are coming up. So just for context, very early on in this crisis, a healthcare working group was formed, and it continues to work hard on our behalf, and public health is, of course, our first and most urgent priority. In addition to fundamental health concerns, though, the COVID-19 crisis has put a strain on individuals and families and on local employers. And so that raises two questions for us. First, or two sets of questions, actually. First, how do we support those who are struggling the most? Those who are most vulnerable to the health threat, those experiencing homelessness or food insecurity or financial crisis. For these kinds of questions, the mayor has convened a working group for securing the social services safety net. And that group is hard at work. I'm not sure what their plans are, but I'm sure will be reporting out at some point. And that's not actually the focus of this meeting, but we look forward to hearing from them. Okay. Second, how do we support the private sector? Those businesses that account for 75% of the employment base here in Bloomington. How can we help ensure that last week's staggering increase in unemployment is as short-lived as possible? What can we do to help ensure the resilience of local employers so that as many as possible come through this economic downturn and are poised to succeed when the economy rebounds? For these kinds of questions, the mayor has convened a working group focused on economic stabilization and recovery. And you see a lot of members here tonight. And again, thank you, not just for your work, but for being here as well. It's worth noting that some of the work being done by these three different groups had begun to happen organically. But that said, I think one of the things we all realize very quickly is that these are all complex and interrelated issues. And so Mayor Hamilton's call for the creation of these three different working groups has allowed work to move forward in a very collaborative and very coordinated way. And so thank you to Mayor Hamilton for that, leading us in that. So why is it important that we're doing this now? Why is it important to have this conversation tonight? Okay, first, obviously, the need is urgent. Employers are struggling, and many of them had to lay off staff. Virtually all have taken a financial hit, and some are uncertain about whether or not they'll be able to reopen at all. Federal and state support may not be available for weeks, and so we particularly need an interim response. Second, any economic response is going to require financial resources. Toward that end, the City Council sent a request to the Food and Beverage Tax Advisory Commission, or FABTAC, last week, requesting up to $2 million to support economic resilience and recovery efforts. That request was approved a few days ago, just on Friday. Tomorrow night, City Council will take up an appropriation ordinance, the legal mechanism that allows us to actually deploy these funds. Before voting on that appropriation ordinance, Council has asked for a report on the plan for administering these funds. We take very seriously our fiscal responsibilities, and so Council President Boland asked this committee to take point on these issues. So tonight is an opportunity to begin hearing about that plan and to begin discussion on it. Just to be clear, we are not voting on any ordinance or resolution tonight, appropriation or otherwise. Rather, this meeting is an opportunity for council members to hear more about all of the work that's been going on behind the scenes, and for the working group to get some preliminary feedback from the group, from council members before bringing this to the entire council tomorrow night. So does that set the context fairly well? Great. Okay, with that, I want to turn it over to Alex Crowley, Director of Economic and Sustainable Development for the city. Alex, I don't know if you're going to do a screen share of any materials, but Stephen can help us with that, I'm sure, if need be.
Well, I was going to start really by talking through where we are. I do have a link that I think the public should know about, which I can show towards the end. It's a link to resources that are available online that's being hosted by the chamber. But let me start first by thanking you for the opportunity to talk to you about where we are. As you may know, from those of you who've seen the draft plan, it is in an early draft. In fact, there has been a pretty significant undertaking to update that. And we will release that as quickly as possible. But the plan that you have looked at already was what we called version 2. And it was put together by the working group. So let me introduce the working group. We have Jen Pearl, who is with the Bloomington Economic Development Corporation, Aaron Predmore with the Greater Bloomington Chamber of Commerce. I don't see him, but Pat East is with Dimension Mill Inc. is part of the working group. Brian Payne, I don't see him either, is with CDFI Friendly Bloomington. He's been part of the group as well. And then Jane Cooper-Smith, who is there, and Sean Starowitz, who is present, not visible, are both members of the Department of Economic and Sustainable Development. So I am the Director of Economic and Sustainable Development, and it's been a great honor and pleasure to work with everybody to try to pull together some strategies and initial thoughts for the mayor, which we delivered last Thursday for his initial review, and then have been updating the document since then with feedback not only from the mayor, but also feedback from some community partners that we've leveraged along the way, including IBRC, which is the Indiana Business Resource Center, who's been very helpful in providing us sort of economic data along the way. We've also interfaced with the Cook Center for Entrepreneurship, or at IB Tech with Steve Bryant and his group, Downtown Bloomington Inc., Talisha is on this meeting, and so gotten some feedback from them about what's going on the ground. Visit Bloomington has also been very helpful in helping us understand the impact of tourism. And then there are many others who've been involved. We took the draft and we circulated it to the committee. We also sent it to our counterparts at the county. So Jeff McKim, who's here, and then for the council, and then also the commissioners, because one of the key things for us is to make sure that there's kind of regional alignment. So we're also sharing it with other organizations to make sure that they understand what the current thinking is. Again, it's very much a work in progress, but keep them apprised of the situation and aligned with what we're thinking right now. So fundamentally, the document is a multi-pronged strategy, a policy recommendation that attempts to balance immediate needs, both from a funding and non-funding perspective, with mid-range and long-term needs that will emerge once, hopefully, COVID-19 begins to wane. Our immediate and urgent focus is on what we're calling rapid response. And rapid response, again, includes both funding and non-funding. From a funding perspective, the challenge is fourfold. One is to determine what the funding need is, but not just in the aggregate, really in the context of other monies that are being brought to bear from, for example, the CARES Act. So, you know, what are the resources that are coming into the community from the outside? How do those help? Where are the gaps that come from those? And then what can the local funding mechanism do to fill in those gaps? So we are not striving to carry the Bloomington economy for 12 months. That's not, we don't have at all the kind of local resources that are, you know, that would be required to do that. That kind of work is best undertaken and delivered by federal and state efforts. And so we're really, you know, understanding those as they're developing. As you may know, they're already working on phase 4 for the CARES Act. So what we know today will continue to change, but trying to understand that with as much detail as possible so we can see what we can do with the limited resources that we might have available to fill in those gaps. And then there's also, so there's a rapid response funding, and then there's rapid response, what we call technical assistance. Also, you can think of it as wraparound services. So one of the challenges that's out there is that, you know, small businesses don't have the expertise or capacity necessarily to wade through all of the benefits that may be flowing in from, say, the SBA and other, you know, other stimulus programs that are being put out there. So, you know, standing up and delivering a kind of navigator function that that might be a first stop for people who are trying to figure out, you know, what to take advantage of and what does it mean for them. But that navigating function doesn't necessarily have to have all the answers. There are a lot of resources in town that can help. So you could conceive of a call coming into that navigating function, whether it's a phone call or a text or some other communication in that could be routed if it's SBA relevant to you know, the SBDC over at you know, Steve Bryant's group. So there are a lot of, you know, ways that we can help that don't necessarily involve money, but money obviously is an important thing that needs to be considered and brought to bear to the extent possible. So, you know, if you look at the funding side of the rapid response, as we've said previously, there are basically 4 challenges that we have to work simultaneously in order to set up a strong response systems. The first is to determine what is the need. And we're doing that by looking both at ground level, anecdotal and you know, survey based information coming in. And I mentioned DBI has been very helpful. The Chamber's been very helpful. Visit Bloomington's been very helpful. I mean, we're getting information in from a variety of different sources, BDC as well. So trying to understand from a bottoms up perspective, what are people running into? What are their challenges? From a top down perspective, what is the, how many service businesses are there? How many restaurants versus other types of businesses? Quantifying it from a economic data perspective, and then using that to help inform what the need might be. And that's where the IBRC was very helpful. And then looking at what other communities are doing and understanding, that activities so that it can help inform our understanding of our own need by extrapolating. And then finally, looking at the inbound, setting up a channel that will be a kind of inbound intake form, an application process that will in itself very specifically quantify very specific requests. So the combination of all of that helps us to establish what the need is. Another challenge that's being worked simultaneously is understanding what the funding sources may be. And those in the document, as you've seen, currently consider the food and beverage tax as a potential source. And we did receive late in the day today initial indications from the State Board of Accounts that may be a viable source. And so, there's some broad statewide direction that they've given relative to that. We need to dig into that just a little bit more with our counsel and legal counsel to understand what does that mean specifically for us, but that was a positive outcome from the request that was made up there. We are also looking at the Bloomington Urban Enterprise Association as a potential funding source, and then others that may be brought to bear potentially in the future, or especially if some of the ones that we have teed up may not be viable for whatever reason. So that's the second challenge. The third challenge is to develop and implement a system for administration of any kind of funding related support that we bring into the market. So what that means is literally who's going to, first of all, what is the intake function? What does that look like? What are the questions being asked? Who does it go to? And by that, that means what group will be empowered to evaluate loan requests or grant requests and make decisions about those. It should be clear, hopefully, to everybody that level of expertise is critical to the success of a program like this, and that the city does not have that level of expertise on staff. And so we would be tapping community expertise to help us do that. So the administration also involves the setting up of kind of the mechanics of where does the money sit? How does it get there? How is that money then released functionally into borrower, hands? And then in the cases of loans, how is that money returned back to what location, by what mechanism? So we're having discussions about that and really trying to work out the mechanics. So by the time funding may become available, we will have made progress on that and we're ready to hit the ground running. So we've had some good discussions with a variety of different partners for those activities. And then finally, the question of measurement of what's happening in terms of these particular activities, but also the broader picture, reporting that back to make this as transparent, as thorough a process as possible. And the State Board of Accounts will be auditing, and so there's a pretty strict level of reporting that will be required just for that. But we want to make sure that this is a very transparent process, that people feel comfortable that taxpayer money is being put forward in a way that's professional, deliberate, disciplined, that we're not throwing good money after bad money, but on the other hand, that we're bringing it to market as quickly as we can, because one of the things we've realized is that the one of the biggest gaps may be time, maybe the delay in people receiving, again, some of the cares and other programs. So time is of the essence, but we don't want to rush things out there in a messy way that doesn't have the kind of controls we need. We just have to do it fast. So, again, we are looking at this as first and foremost a very quick set of activities to get a rapid response package of support out there. We are going to be also building up activities related to more of the midterm of the virus and the pandemic. By that, we mean sometime probably in the 4 to 12 month period where maybe we've crested and are starting to come back, but the students haven't returned potentially, or they have, but it's not what it has been in the past. We're not sure exactly what's going to happen in the future, but there's going to be a need for a moment in time potentially when the business community and the arts organizations that we are targeting for the kind of program that we're working on will need to revenue generate and may not have fully recovered. So is there anything in the mid-range of 4 to 12 months that we need to be thinking about that could create some revenue generating opportunities? Silly examples are, and this is obviously not 4 months out, but Mother's Day is a huge day for restaurants, and graduation, of course, is a huge time for the whole hospitality industry in Bloomington. Both of those are basically on lockdown and are not going to happen. Mother's Day will, but to the same degree. So we have to look out over the calendar, start thinking about what are those other events that people count on that are really big days in the calendar year that may or may not happen. And is there something that we can do to get ahead of that and try to stage for some semblance of revenue generation, even though it would not be in the same way as traditionally we've seen in the past. So, and then there's the long term, and the long term, is arguably the most important, because what COVID-19 will do to Bloomington from 12 months to 5 years out is unclear. What is clear is if we are smart about it, and if we bring the right partners to bear now, we can emerge stronger than we were when we went into it. And we can accelerate changes that were going to have to happen anyway. Maybe over the course of a decade, we can be looking at that acceleration at this moment when things are kind of broken, as a way to heal fast and actually come out with a much greater growth potential than we might have otherwise seen. So, there are a lot of really smart people who can help us think through that, whether it's at the university or throughout the country. The trick is to bring that group together and really think through and be smart about how we go about setting ourselves up for a brighter future. So that is something that also has to happen. Obviously not this week, but certainly as quickly as possible, because we will be at some point having to set in programs that will take probably years to develop. So I'll finish up. I mean, I think the CARES Act is a pretty substantial thing. It's it's phase 3 has come out just last Friday, I guess. Whenever things are moving really quickly. So part of the challenge that the working group has had is to stay abreast of what all of this stuff means. We have hopefully other stimulus and support coming in the future. We'll see. But in the meantime, we are we are focused very much on rapid response funding and non-funding today, and really appreciate the council, putting forward the appropriation ordinance and helping us to time, some funding for potentially as early as the end of next week or the beginning of the following week. I think that I will pause right now and potentially, if it's all right with the committee, open it up to my colleagues on the working group to see if anybody wants to chime in with any additional thoughts before we open it up to questions.
Mr. Lucas, could you please unmute anyone who needs unmuting? So.
One of the things that I might add, and thank you to the city and all of our.
Could you introduce yourself?
Oh, thank you. My name is Jennifer Pearl, and I'm the president of the Bloomington Economic Development Corporation. And, thank you to all of the colleagues that we've been working with on this. It's been amazing to see how the community has really pulled together, and we just appreciate everyone so much. To build on Alex's points is the regional economy is a piece of this puzzle. We're starting with what we can focus on here in Bloomington. And we're also looking at two halves of the economy. There's the local economy and those, retail and other stores that are serving people right here. And we're also building in an eye to the traded sectors. These larger employers like Cook and Catalent and others that have a multiplier effect in our community, where they bring funding into the economy. And so as we move forward, it's really looking at how these two things play together so that we can build a strong economy moving forward.
Thank you, Ms. Pearl. Are there other comments from the committee? Or the working group, I should say, I'm sorry. Ms. Credmore.
I'll just add that it's been an honor to be able to work on this policy paper. I feel like I was in graduate school again with a deadline and a lot of people trying to do a group project and editing together and laughing a lot. So it was good, but it's also a whip smart group. And that was really, really important too, to be able to facilitate both the building of the policy paper, but also the good discussions about the pros and cons of looking at things a different way. So I think what you have in front of you and what we here to discuss tonight is a good start. We do want feedback. I know Alex said that, but that's sincere. We want to make it a better, stronger policy for the community. So hearing from you guys and your thoughts as well, we'll be able to strengthen it for everyone.
Thank you, Ms. Predmore. Anyone else from the working group? Okay, seeing none, then let's come to the committee. We have council members Flaherty, Sandberg, and Boland. How much time do we want to allow for each member question? 5 minutes? Is that?
Yeah, I don't think we need more than 5 minutes per person.
Let's work on 5 minutes per person. Council members will have a chance to come back and offer comments at the end as well. So why don't we start with that, and why don't we open it up for questions? So council member Boland, can you time us?
Yeah, I've got it.
Thank you.
Point of order.
Councilmember Flaherty?
Yeah, are we going to ask is each committee member going to ask all of their questions within a 5 minute ask and then try to get answered all of their questions within a 5 minute period? Or I'm sorry, Steve's going to stop, or Councilmember Rowland is going to stop and start a timer.
Yeah, just 5 minutes at a time.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Okay. Who would like to start? Councilmember Flaherty.
Any questions?
Yeah. First, thank you, Mr. Crowley and other members of the Economic Stabilization and Recovery Working Group for your presentation, for all your hard work. I read the draft of the report yesterday and was highly impressed by the amount that you all were able to put into this in a very short time period. So I think it's impressive work and very well thought out. I had a handful of initial questions that I submitted to Mr. Crowley by email, and he was able to quickly answer most of those, but I still have some points I wanted to ask about or follow up on. The first of those is I had a question about food and beverage tax dollars and who those could go to, like what types of businesses, what sectors, because the report seemed to sort of suggest that arts organizations and grants would come from BUEA money as opposed to the food and beverage tax pot of money. And I think the answer was something like there might be limits that we couldn't use food and beverage tax dollars for grants as opposed to being able to use them for loans. So I was wondering, is my understanding of that correct? And also, where is that within Title VI? Is that prohibition on using food and beverage tax dollars for grants there, or is it guidance from the State Board of Accounts, or where's that particular thought coming from?
Well, so we were anticipating that there might be some limitations coming from the State Board of Accounts, and we, as I mentioned earlier, have just gotten the kind of direction from them, the notice. So I think in order to answer that, I would feel more comfortable having a little time with our council to understand. We did put, I don't know if the committee has seen it, but sort of statewide notice. I think we need to dig in and understand what is possible and not possible. Certainly, we do consider our organizations to be tourism businesses. So from that perspective, I think we were comfortable in a case where there would be any kind of loan structure going out to those entities. It was not clear at the time, and is not absolutely crystal clear right now yet, that we have the ability to grant from that. And we want to make sure that we are obviously following exactly the direction that we can follow legally. So if it's all right with you, I think I'd like, again, just get a very clear read from legal counsel, so that we can be, black and white about that.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Other questions from the committee? Councilmember Volan, did I see your hand up earlier or not?
No, I'm still reviewing my notes here, trying to get my thoughts together.
I do want to say that I really appreciated the thoughtfulness that certain committee members went through the document and asked written questions before. That was really helpful. And so we were able to set some of those aside, but we really appreciate the feedback and the questions that came in. There were comments and questions that were very helpful.
Yeah, I will ask a question. If you don't mind, Madam Chair. Alex, can you talk about the creed? I asked specifically in writing yesterday whether, considering that is a pool of money we can consider using in this crisis. It expired last year, apparently, the creed district. And is there any value in seeking its reopening during this crisis in the months and years to come?
And Mr. Crowley, just for those who may be watching on CATS or who may be not unfamiliar with CREED, could you explain what that is?
Yeah, so CREED is a community revitalization enhancement district, I think it is, and so CRED. And there are two in Bloomington. They were set up a long time ago, and they do have a window of time that they are open for and then close. And one is sort of broadly the downtown, and the other one is basically the what we call the Thompson Creed, and that was set up around the what used to be the Cook Pharmica building. It was an RC building, became Cook Pharmica, and it's now the Catalent. So these were two tactical economic development funds. And the way they work is that they set a baseline for, I'm doing this from the top of my head, but for, I think, sales tax and payroll tax. So they set a foundation at the beginning of the creed period. And then as the sales tax and the payroll taxes increase over time, normally they would go up to the state and stay at the state, but the state actually remits back a certain amount of money with a cap each year. And I believe the downtown cap is $1.5 million and the Thompson cap is $1 million. And that goes into a fund, a CREED fund, which is housed locally. So those monies have been spent, and they are administered through a commission that meets very rarely, but is called the Bloomington Industrial Development Advisory Commission. BIDAC, and as needed, an employer or an investor within one of the two CREED areas may petition for use of CREED dollars to help with an economic development project. So they're somewhat limited in their applicability. This is a process that goes through the review by the BIDAC, the Bloomington Industrial Development Advisory Commission, and then comes up to council. And so they don't happen that often, but when they do happen, the process is up through council and ultimately gets approved by council on the recommendation of BIDAC. An example of one that came up, I think it was in early 2017, was an expansion of the Envisage space inside of the Fountain Square Mall. And they had sought CREED funding to reimburse some of the construction cost investment they were putting to expand the footprint inside the building. And kind of like a tax abatement, what happens is you have an agreement set up between the petitioner and the city. That agreement often, if not, ties reimbursement and performance to employment growth with certain criteria, and potentially other deliverables that the petitioner is held accountable to over the course of their reimbursement. So anyway, that's a long way of answering what CREED is, but basically, as a result, you actually have these two funds that accumulate over time, and so the question of whether or not they would become available, I think the answer is twofold. One is we are going to be having over the long term a lot of surprises when it comes to tax receipts, and we need to be aware of that fact. We need to know that there are going to be some changes to revenues coming to the city, and so we want to make sure we don't use up all the powder.
My time is up, Mr. Crowley. That was my 5-minute limit. So,
Mr. Crowley, do you want to finish out?
Yeah, if you would.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I'm rambling on. So we want to make sure, number one, that we don't use up all of the potential funding in the near term because we don't know what's coming down the pipeline. And then number two, again, the purpose of what we are trying to do is really tactical gap filling right now. We're not trying to carry an economy. We just don't have the resources to do it. So what I would say is as we think about how we want to roll out support, it's a big boon for us to have the food and beverage available. I think that was going to be always going to be our first priority if we could do it. And that sounds like that's possible. So I would hesitate to go dip elsewhere until we can see what kind of effect we can have with that first tranche of funding.
Thank you.
Other questions? Councilmember Sandberg.
She's muted.
Wait, hang on.
Can you unmute her?
Susan, I think you're unmuted. You may have to click something on your end to. There you go.
Okay. I will yield to my time back to someone else. I just want to thank this group. They are whip smart. They've done an excellent job. And so what I have heard, I'm completely in support of and really have no other questions. I think it's a good plan. We're in a very fluid situation. We don't have all the answers now, but I have every belief that this is a group that can further work on what they presented to us tonight. And I'm very pleased with the results so far. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Boland.
Yeah, so I'd like to follow up on my question to Mr. Crowley by saying, the reason I ask about the CREED is that, like with the TIF district, it captures dollars that would otherwise go to general tax funds, and it allows us to reinvest those tax dollars that we paid into the geographic area that the creed covers. In other words, the downtown creed could be reinvested in the downtown. And that's why I asked about it, is because, you know, like the businesses in that area are going to pay taxes anyway. Instead of them going to the state for general purposes, they can stay in the community and be used for specific purposes to serve that area. That's why I thought it was worth considering reestablishing the creed, because, wow, more than ever, I mean, look at the meeting we're having right now. We're talking about downtown businesses that are suddenly, you know, within 3 weeks of today, they were not imagining that they were not going to survive through the next few months. So this is why I ask. It's not so much because I want to use that pot of money before the food and beverage tax money. It's that we need all the resources we can get. And so that's why I asked specifically, is it worth considering asking the state to let us reestablish this creed so that we can specifically bring more resources to the downtown businesses that used to be served by that creed? What say you?
Well, so we could create a new creed, right? So when a creed runs out, the money doesn't go away, but but the ongoing return of incremental monies go away. So,
right.
So the problem with, I mean, so yeah, I think, you know, it would, as these things sunset, it is important to recognize the value that they've provided to the city. But practically speaking, you know, let's say we were tomorrow morning able to reset a creed and start the clock again. The first thing that has to happen is you have a 1 year period of you set your tax receipts as a new foundation, and then the only thing that's coming in
is the increment.
And that happens 12 months later. And obviously, the first couple of years of incremental growth, especially in this day and age, are going to be somewhat anemic. So I don't know that as a tool for short-term recovery, it makes as much sense as it does as a tool for really long-term application.
Well, I mean, I don't disagree with you. I just, you have rightly said that, you know, we can't just be looking at the immediate short term, although that's urgent, and that's why we're all meeting so rapidly. But the medium and the long term, and like anybody who thinks that the net impact of what just happened this month is, you know, going to be contained in 2020, I think is kidding themselves. So the sooner that we can, I mean, here what seemed to be a good idea. Taxes that would have been collected anyway by the state are diverted from the state back to the area where they were collected for investment in that area. If that is if my understanding of the principle of a creed is correct, it seems like this is something worth reestablishing, you know, with all due speed. It is a shame I mean, I would frankly want to lobby the state to say, can you undo the closure of the creed so that we can set our baseline back to where it was when the creed was established? Do you see what I mean? Yeah.
I mean, I would certainly take a look at it. I had misunderstood your question as to whether or not that could yield short-term revenues for us to try.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, we have the money that was collected from the fund over the past few, 15 years or so. It's almost none of it's been spent. So, I mean, I'm happy that resource is available. I'm content to consider it at the rate that you all are willing to consider it, but it's a substantially larger fund than the food and beverage tax fund is right now. Anyway, just a thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Volin. Jennifer, Ms. Pearl, did you ring in? Okay, just checking. All right, other questions from the committee?
More when you're ready, but I'm happy to have you ask questions too, Madam Chair, if you have them.
No, go ahead. Councilmember Clary.
Sure. For context, I think of high importance to me, and this is reflected in the document to some extent, is trying to prioritize workers and employees. And I know the loans, for instance, one of the loan products that the food and beverage tax dollars would support would allow for only a certain set of expenses. And it says specifically to go to support wages, payroll costs, rent or utilities, and or other immediate essential expenses. Funds may not be distributed to equity investors or owners. So I think that's positive. I'm wondering if there's a way to incentivize covering payroll and helping workers. I think the negative there might be, I guess, if there's been layoffs, I don't know if that would compromise people's access to unemployment dollars, which is something we probably need to consider, and maybe there's other considerations. But kind of just brainstorming, and forgive me if I've got any of the details wrong, but I think some of the federal money coming to small businesses has looked at loans where portions of the loan could be forgiven or written off if it went specifically to payroll or maybe some other uses. So I'm wondering if something like that or any other tools to incentivize the prioritization of workers has been considered in the context of the financial products, 3 in particular, that were developed and reported at the end of the document.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, I would caution all of us that, if you, someone, I think Aaron may have made this point, if you think of, a 20-person organization and the monthly payroll that represents, right? You can burn through local funding support really fast. So, I think what we have to do is understand the CARES Act thoroughly, understand how it works. I think there is a retroactive component to it. And then also, as you suggest, as long as you're maintaining your employee base and that the workers are reinstated and kept on, that there's a forgiveness program that runs its course. So I think that we have to rely on that kind of program for what it's designed to do and have it work as hard as possible for us without getting in the way of it. My guess, and we have to really understand this, and we'll get a much better view of this as we open up and receive applications. But my guess is that the kinds of things that people will seeking will be, interim spending, bridge loans until that stuff kicks in. So we're not going to have to carry a payroll for 3 months. We're going to just have to cover someone while the house is on fire for them. But also, my guess is that we're going to see things come in where, it's kind of spending lines that are falling between the cracks of what's coming in from the CARES Act, and that we will, we'll probably very quickly realize that there are gaps in that support that we can help with. I've heard, and I don't know if this is, I haven't looked at the CARES Act well enough or totally internalized it, but, one restaurant owner mentioned the perishability of their inventory and how that kind of exposure to solvency and future, reopening is a gap that, that's a real gap for a very specific sector of the economy. So, the question is, does that kind of stuff get covered by the programs coming from the SBA, from the federal government? And if not, you could imagine this kind of program could target that very thin sliver of overlooked, help. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but basically I think we need to understand a little bit better from what the applications are going to be asking for, where the need is, but that the payroll, pure payroll on any given week for all affected businesses in Bloomington will blow this money immediately. And we won't even, cover a fraction of that need.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Pearl, you had your electronic hand up.
Related to that question, actually, so through the federal government, there's now the Paycheck Protection Program, and I'm reading this from the SBA website. It's a loan designed to provide direct incentive for small businesses to keep their workers on payroll. Mr. Crowley had mentioned that, as part of CARES Act. So there will be areas that we can leverage to provide additional support for workers.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Boland?
Yes. So to that end, I remember thinking the Paycheck Protection Act is effective as of March 24th, which was a week ago today. But I know that there were layoffs of employees before Tuesday the 24th among local businesses. Is there some way that they will, I don't know if layoff is the same as furlough or firing, but do those, say, local businesses that laid people off between, say, the 13th and the 24th, will they be coming? Can they, I don't even know what question to ask. Like, are they going to rehire or unfurlough people so that both the business and the employee can qualify for that funding? Or do we just let them go? I don't know how to ask this question even.
Ms. Predmore from Bloomington Chamber. Oh.
Okay, now I'm unmuted. I had to mute myself because of my loud family. So yeah, if I can answer for you there, Steve, I talked actually to Representative Hollingsworth yesterday on my podcast, which y'all I know are listening to, but in case you missed the episode, he said that, I asked him that exact question because we have a lot of businesses that are small businesses that were told at the beginning of the crisis, lay off your workers so that they can get unemployment coverage. And then now we turn around twice and you're supposed to keep your workers on.
Right.
So I asked him what they were supposed to do. And I think that's the question you're trying to get to is what advice, how do we navigate that? And so what he said was that the way that they're going to do the payroll protection program is they're going to look at someone's payroll level before the crisis and then at the point like moving forward. And if those two numbers are within a certain percentage, it doesn't have to be exact, but it's like, and he couldn't tell me exactly what that was going to be because of the policy creation is going on right now, but they're going to navigate that by saying, okay, you're within this 10% of where I'm making up 10%, but wherever you were, and then therefore you're good to go and be able to move forward that way and can claim that forgivable loan and will have made.
But I'm talking about like a restaurant that basically shut down. They laid off 70% of their employees in that 2-week period before the CARES Act kicked in. What are they supposed to do?
Right. So if they go for the payroll protection program, what he would say is if they want to get those funds, they would bring back all of those employees and be able to continue using those funds to pay them. And then at the time of reporting back to find out if the loan is forgivable as a grant or if it's just if it's just a loan, if they didn't meet the criteria, that at that point they're going to compare it from before the crisis to that point in time in the future. So they're just making sure they're still able to cover that. So he would say if you wanted that forgiven, you needed to go ahead and bring those staff back.
As the president of the chamber, what do you think is the likelihood that businesses will rehire under those circumstances? How, like, I don't even know how to phrase the question, but do you see what I mean? Like, how many of them are likely to bring people back instead of letting them stay on unemployment?
Right. So I think it's going to be interesting. It's going to be, it's clearly going to be case by case. The one thing about the avalanche of information that's come out through these 3 sections of the legislation has just been that it's very hard for someone to navigate what is the best choice for my business and my employees and all of that, right?
Right.
So I do think that what I'm hearing from members is those that were, almost all of them have applied for that SBA loan to start the process. So that was the first thing. The payroll protection program is part of that. They're part of that same application.
Okay.
So they're already in the hopper for that. And so they're just going to navigate as they go forward. Those loans that they've applied for, they've not got the money yet. So they've only gone through that first process, part of the process, and there are 3 steps. So I haven't heard of anyone that's already heard back from them for step 2 or 3.
No, but
So I guess that's my they're just going to get all that information. Yeah, they're going to do that. Now, as of yesterday, that there wasn't an option for the SBA loans to request $10,000 for emergency funding. And so that's a new thing that came out yesterday. So you might see some small businesses saying, yes, I need that money now, and then getting that and be able to bring back their workers immediately. So a lot of it, I think, depends on the business model.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions from the committee? I will actually jump in with one then, or actually a couple. First of all, it's kind of a question, but honestly more of a comment. One of the things that I think can be very confusing and somewhat Byzantine, particularly for others, people in the community, is kind of the hierarchy of resources. You know, what is the order in which people tend to apply for things? What is the order in which they would kick in? So as the report is refined, I think that particular tool and a visual would be helpful. So I offer that thought. Mr. Crowley or members of the working group, we talked a little bit about this at the beginning, but can you summarize next steps? What is the working group doing between now and tomorrow's council meeting? What comes after that? Sure.
So as I mentioned, what you have seen is version 2 of a document that will continue to evolve. We've gotten a lot of really great feedback about it and are making adjustments to the document to reflect that and welcome your feedback as part of that process. So we're not done with that revision and we'll integrate the comments and the feedback we've gotten previously from committee members, but also anything from tonight. So we want to update that to reflect the latest thinking, reflect the latest information from the CARES Act and some of the other programs, and also reorient the document to make it a little bit more of an action document relative to some of the early stage activities. So that's happening in the background, and it will probably not be available in time for tomorrow's council meeting. In fact, at council, we're going to give a pretty high level summary. This is a much deeper dive into what we're doing. We only have about 5 minutes. So I'll just, for the full council, we'll give a quick summary of what we've been doing and where things are. But at the same time, we are also preparing for a request of the BUEA, the Bloomington Urban Enterprise Association, which will be a funding request from them that is scheduled to occur on Wednesday of next week, so the 8th. We are in the midst of a window right now of public notice that has to run its course. We've not gotten relief from the state for that window. Has to run its course before funding can be released. So that window, I believe, ends on April 9th, which does raise a question as to whether or not council should consider rescheduling next week's meeting if it's designed to be in part-timed with the end of that window. And I can get confirmation of that date, but I think that's the date that the window runs out. So that we gotta wait for that to play itself out, but we're not sitting around on our hands. As I mentioned earlier, we are really looking closely at the administrative structure that will be required, and it's everything. It's where does the money sit? What kind of contract do we have with any sort of advisory group or a guideline document that holds them accountable for any activities that they would undertake? Who's in that group? Can we get them locked in? What kind of arrangement do we have to put in place legally with a banking function that might be the intermediary to issue monies out through some sort of trust, counts? Things like liability exposure that the advisory committee might face as part of the role that they're playing, and how do we mitigate that risk for them? It's just a lot of wonky agreement stuff that has to be put in place, and so we can work on all of that and are working on all of that now. So that when and if the council were to vote on and pass the appropriation ordinance, we could either be done with all of that or very close to being done. There is a final step that happens after the appropriation ordinance, which is that it has to go back up to the state and for one last time for a quick turnaround approval, usually a handful of days. So again, we're hard at work really finalizing all of the mechanisms that need to be put in place, and then getting ready for go to market.
Thank you for that. So we're going to go to comments by the public in a minute, and so I would ask those of you who are interested in making comment or offering comments, please use your Zoom group chat to let Mr. Lucas know. And that way we can keep track of who has an interest in commenting and the order in which people would like to comment. And if chat isn't working for you, just go ahead and raise your hand and we'll find you. So anything else from the members of the committee? Councilmember Flaherty.
Yeah, I had asked this in writing as well. And I was just wondering, well, I wanted to put the question out there and see if there were any updates, which was all of the financial products that are recommended in the policy recommendations, I believe, have a requirement that businesses meet the Bloomington Living Wage Ordinance, so a certain minimum salary level. And I'm wondering, my question was, if we have a sense of how many businesses, local small businesses that might otherwise be eligible would be disqualified by this requirement. And then I was thinking specifically about service sector and how that might be a little bit complicated in terms of, tip wages and that sort of thing, which is exactly the issue that Mr. Crowley highlighted in response. And I think city legal is looking into providing additional guidance there. So I just kind of wanted to flag the issue and I guess ask if there's any updates on that particular issue.
Yeah, there's a little bit of an update and I can give you that update. A strict reading of the living wage ordinance lists out very specific funds that are susceptible or covered by that ordinance. Food and beverage is not one of them. And so, a strict reading says that actually, if this were administered through Jack Hopkins or, some other fund that's listed in that ordinance, then the living wage ordinance would apply. But in this case, it's not clear. It does not, because food and beverage is not listed. So, I think, I think we're all philosophically a little bit torn here, because on the one hand, obviously a living wage is what we're all striving to have across, the world and Bloomington. And so philosophically, you would want that to be in place. I think the challenge is that would probably disqualify a lot of the businesses that we're actually trying to help, and either burden them with excess expenses moving forward beyond what their regular expense base is for employment, based on elevating the wage. It seems a bit counterproductive for what we're trying to do, while at the same time, we obviously philosophically all align on the basic need for that. So, I think one of the things that I take comfort in is recognizing that the state has certain, has put a certain requirement in place that we need to pay attention to about, making sure that this aligns with, tourism and tourism related businesses. And so, I think we just have to get comfortable with whether or not we can live with that reading. And then I would echo our legal counsel recommended that we should probably be pretty explicit at the moment of the appropriation ordinance relative to food and beverage monies, and be explicit about what our intent is, which, obviously I defer to all of you on, but that we should probably make sure that that's clear in that ordinance. Right now, we would probably recommend not making that a requirement, just by virtue of the exclusion problem with so many of the businesses we're trying to help. But again, deferring to you, whatever that decision is needs to be pretty clearly laid out in the ordinance.
Quick follow-up related. I shared your thoughts essentially that we're by potentially excluding a lot of businesses, you are possibly just harming the business environment generally, but also harming workers who work at those businesses for less than a living wage, which is not what we're after ultimately. So trying to find that right, it's this kind of paradox of the situation we find ourselves in. I wondered if you could make aid not contingent on currently paying a living wage, but if you could make it some sort of condition for they must meet this in the future after some period of time. I'm trying to strike some balance essentially is what I was thinking through. So I don't know, I guess a question would be, what do you think about that? But it seems like you said currently the recommendation would not be to require that an eligible business pay a living wage. But I guess, do you think there would be other ways to explore incentives to try to get businesses there? Though again, it's this difficult sort of period to be doing that. Everybody's struggling. It's a tough time to say raise your wages, but I don't know. Trying to strike that balance. Any additional thoughts?
I agree with you that there's that there are certain sectors where that wage level is lower than anybody would want to see it, right? And I guess my reaction to that is that's a problem that we need to tackle regardless. I'm not sure I would use this moment of extreme pain to try to leverage and actually complicate the recovery period. So, I think it's one of those things where that is a problem. That's a problem we as a society but we as a city need to be trying to figure out over the long term. I just don't know if this is the moment to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Crowley. Thank you, council members. I want to go to public comment as well. I'm not seeing anything on chat, but I think, Stephen, you are the arbiter of chat. So
we do have one member of the public who spoke up, Alicia, and I think I've activated her video and audio.
Yes,
video, if that's
hello.
what she prefers.
okay, Ms.
Yeah.
Kaplan?
Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi. Well, I just wanted to say thank you so much for the committee's work on this topic and the expertise that's there.
Alicia, could you introduce yourself and your role, please?
Yes, hi. My name is Talisha Kopik. I'm with Downtown Bloomington, Inc. And thank all of you for your expertise. Impressed with the rapid response. Reviewed the document over the weekend, and it's really clearly written, so it's really easy to understand, which will be very appreciated. It's an important resource. As we know, downtown has over 900 businesses. 100 of those are restaurants, 70 are small shops, over 20 art organization, and a super heavy special event calendar that's now empty. It's our community's gathering place. And this has been so devastating for so many. So we really, really appreciate your work. Some of the other things you were thinking and talking about with restaurants with their inventory, other activities that the businesses really rely on this summer are all the IU activities, this student orientation, especially with 6 weeks of new students and them not coming in is going to be really hurtful as well. Some of the retail shops, they'll start purchasing their inventory for Christmas already, and so they need to plan for that. Those restaurants losing some good employees. And so, and some of the stores that are just starting out, or the restaurants just starting out, are so leveraged. So it's a big decision for them to even go into more debt. So we use this as an opportunity to help them do some gap filling, and it's an opportunity to learn more about all the decisions facing our small businesses and what it takes to run one of those and the risks that it takes. So anything that we can help stabilize that would be appreciated. So just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kopik. Are there other comments?
I've not seen any other comments come in, but if members of the public want to comment now, there should be a chat button on the bottom control bar of your screen. You can click that and let me know in chat. And we do have one more. Give me just a second.
Can you hear me, Stephen?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Dave Askins with the B Square Beacon. It's intensely frustrating to watch a public meeting where the members of the elected body have read a document, have a document available to them, and read aloud from that document when the document has not been disseminated to the public. And I would encourage you to disseminate whatever document or whatever version is available at this time before the council meeting tomorrow. Simply watermark it as a draft or what have you. But I think that it's unacceptable to have a public meeting about a document that's not available to the public. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you for your comment. Are there other comments?
We do have one other person who's spoken up.
Hi, this is Tamby. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, could you
Yes.
introduce yourself, please?
Okay, so I just have a couple thoughts. I'm Tamby.
Hi, I'm sorry to interrupt. Could you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, I'm Tamby Cassidy, citizen, and I just want to make a couple comments. First of all, do appreciate that you all are working very hard to try and understand this crazy environment that we're all working in right now. I have a couple suggestions for you because of having to do this myself and trying to navigate through a completely different set of rules to try to make things work. And would like to suggest to you that some of the really valuable resources with respect to the CARES Act, a lot of the lenders are having information on this because they're going to be providing an avenue for obtaining the funds for businesses. And so they are providing some really good summaries to clients when you go to them as a small business and tell them what your needs are, because there are so many different categories of loans and different programs that are coming to us out there right now. So I would just like to suggest that as a resource. And I also would like to question, I don't know if any of you can answer this question, but I am wondering, because it would be of great help to know the answer. Does the stay-at-home order that was given by the governor of Indiana constitute as a quarantine or isolation? Because this qualifies certain workers under the new tax credit and paid sick leave, paid family and medical leave act. And so in order to be eligible to recoup some of these wages and healthcare expenses paid by the employer, because apparently an employee who is sent home for certain reasons under that particular act qualify for compensation. And then the employer can get reimbursed for that compensation. But one of those qualifications is that this has to be a quarantine or isolation. So can anyone answer that question? Does the stay-at-home order constitute or qualify as a quarantine or isolation?
We can take it up after public comment is over.
Thank you, Ms. Cassidy. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
I'm not sure, did I see a hand raised with a response to that or no? Okay. We noted the question. I don't know that any of us have an answer to that right now, but we've noted the question. So thank you for that. And I would invite Mr. Crowley and the working group to consider that in future drafts of the report. So, other comments from the public?
I've not seen any more comments come in. If any folks want to take the time to chat now to let me know, maybe we can go to Councilmember Volan while we give folks another moment to comment.
Let's do that. Councilmember Volan.
Yeah, just briefly, I think Ms. Cassidy's comment is A, relevant, and B, important, and C, a question that I wish Aaron Predmore was still here to maybe address. I think that more than anybody in this conversation right now, she might know the answer to that. But it's a question I'd like to get answered too. I'm not sure anybody knows for sure, which is why the question is so relevant. But it's exactly the kind of question that the group was created to address, and I know is scrambling to try to address. So I don't know that we can get an answer today, but yeah, I'd like to know that too.
Thank you.
Ms. Coopersmith, do you have?
I was just going to say, I agree with you completely. And I think Alex and I, we'd be happy to add that to I'll add it to my to-do list tomorrow. And I don't know, Tambi, how to get in touch with you, but you can find me on the city's website, and I will be happy to look into that. Not sure. I don't want to overpromise, but we need to know.
All I'm trying to say is that the working group has identified 5, 6, 7 different sources of potential aid, and Ms. Cassidy has expressed a general sort of bewilderment at the maze that needs to be navigated. I mean, it's kind of all a good thing. There's just if there's conflicting requirements, like this is exactly what I was worried about. Is what if people apply to a program or they spend money, or if they get money from us now, does it disqualify them for other money later that's from a much more substantial pot? And we just want to make sure we don't inadvertently cause somebody to become ineligible for funds that they desperately need. So,
Jennifer Pearl of the BEDC, you had a comment?
One of the things that we're looking at in response to that, because we're hearing from a lot of employers that are just awash in information and trying to become experts on something that's 3 days old, is it really comes down to the wraparound services. So both having a place that people can go for additional guidance and almost laying out a roadmap for how to navigate the resources is something that we're trying to develop at the same time, so that essentially they can be putting these things piece by piece together. And that we can also be connecting them with other resources in the community that have expertise in these areas, knowing that there are lenders that have been mentioned, there are attorneys in the community that are specializing in pieces and parts of this. The other piece of this as well is the BEDC works with the Indiana Economic Development Corporation, and they have a hotline that's available for answering questions as well. And we can also reach out on behalf of businesses with questions that come up. They've asked us to send them in. And I'm very happy to be a resource for that as well. If anyone's listening, my email is jpearl@bloomingtonedc.com. And also knowing that other members on the working group, Mr. Crowley, Ms. Coopersmith, Ms. Predmore, and others are available to help.
Thank you. Other comments from the public? Mr. Lucas?
No, I don't see any more.
Okay, thank you. Seeing none, let's come back to the committee for any final comments before we adjourn. So, Councilmember Volan.
I just want to ask briefly, what is the schedule for the distribution of the document? Is it simply going to be published tomorrow? Is that it?
Yeah, it's kind of, so we wanted to make sure that the full council had received it before the public. And so the full council will do that. We'll get it to them, and then the public will have it. It's going to be a kind of iterative thing. So, it sort of becomes obsolete almost the moment it's turned into a PDF. But that version 2 will be shared with the council and then with the public in the next 24 hours. And then
let me just ask this. Is the document going to change over the next 24 hours as a result of this meeting?
The version 3 is in development right now, and so that will be significantly different from the version 2. We have to kind of lock in a version and make that distributable to a sequence of audiences, and so we're using version 2 for that. And then when version 3 becomes available, it'll go to the mayor, and then it'll go to this committee and then the council and the public. And so we just want to make sure this is sequenced appropriately, we can take direction from you, but certainly version 3, we want to get to the mayor as quickly as possible for the mayor's review and then out to the public.
Well, because we discussed it in a public meeting here, it's hard for me to say that it's a deliberative draft that shouldn't be distributed. I think that if you were to put the word draft on it and then publish the version 3 tomorrow, I think it would still be better if you released draft 2 now as it is, and then present draft 3 to us as the finished. Just put draft on it in big letters, but I think we need to publish it. If we're discussing it at a public meeting, it should be publicly available. Can you release draft 2 after this meeting?
Yeah, I mean, you all have it. I think it's really between you and your council colleagues. We were really, adhering to. I mean, it's up to. I mean,
as long as you don't. Yeah, I mean that's fine. I mean, it's. I understand what you were thinking, and like it didn't occur to me either. But we really should release it. So I'm happy to send it out after the meeting.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Boland. Mr. Crowley, Matt, is it okay if I jump in?
Yep.
Okay. Mr. Crowley, just to clarify, if I'm understanding you correctly, version 3 may well be not substantially different, but it may be quite an evolution of draft number 2. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
So if indeed we can release draft number 3 within 24 hours, certainly before tomorrow night's council meeting, that may make more sense, particularly if there's releasing draft 2, it sounds like we'll have a lot of missing pieces that will be in draft number 3. Is that accurate? I mean, I think we want to release a report, but I think we want to release the most relevant one. So.
Yeah, but I don't think version 3 will be available in advance of tomorrow's council meeting. We have to integrate a lot of this new information that's coming across in real time. We want to try to integrate some of the more detailed structures as we're developing them. We don't have 18 drafts of this. So I think it's just a balancing act of like, what's the right time to lock something down and send it out for preliminary feedback. We are using versioning to gather feedback. And so we still do have feedback that we'd like to receive. And so I'm not sure we can commit to version 3 of availability and review by the mayor in time for the council meeting tomorrow. I would probably guess it's going to be later this week, if not the end of the week.
Councilmember Boland? Yeah,
all the more reason to the idea is I know that the document isn't done. In your opinion, I know that you're eager to release a finished document. It's just that we're having a public meeting and it's no longer a deliberative draft when it gets into the hands of council members. So, we really should release a second copy, knowing full well that it's not the final copy, that it's a draft document. And the only aid that, because I don't have access to the original Word document, if somebody could, PDF it with the word draft on it and big, watermark on it, that would, I think, let people know that this is not the final version. I'm happy to circulate it now, just as long as people know that this is not the final version. But it should be circulated. So.
Thank you. Other final comments or questions from council? Councilmember Flaherty.
Yeah, a few things. I'll echo, that it would be great to get that distributed. I think maybe some sort of cover page that clarifies that this is a working document that will change, and how to find subsequent versions would be helpful. There is already available in tomorrow night's packet an overview and summary recommendation, as well as a table of contents from this document posted. I must confess, I hadn't downloaded the packet for tonight's meeting. I just since I had the document sent to me, so I didn't realize that the full thing wasn't included. So something to keep in mind. I think it's the committee structure too, and the fact that committees are sort of working on things in a little bit more of an interim way in some cases than council has traditionally handled various matters is probably part of the issue here too. And it's just something we need to be highly aware of in the future. I think just a few comments. I think in kind of teasing out various questions about prioritizing workers and those issues in this conversation, I think I've definitely heard from a fair number of constituents and as well as some business owners that they wanted the priority to be that. And I think there may be a communication gap in terms of people perceiving this as a bailout for, owners, for the wealthy, for, large businesses or small businesses, as the case may be. And I think I think there were some really good answers to questions about that tonight and about how to make sure we're protecting workers as best as possible, whether it's through Payroll Protection Act or through unemployment, and making sure employers know how to use that. So that highlights the importance of the Navigation Center and making sure that we are really on top of those wraparound and supportive services that are non-financial to make sure that as many employers as possible are using the tools that may be available to them to protect their workers. And to, again, just communicating on that and making sure that citizens and residents of Bloomington understand how those protections will work to help them. Two other thoughts. One is there's a few mentions in the document about the importance of prioritizing equity in these considerations. We didn't necessarily talk about that aspect a whole lot tonight. So I'd be curious to hear more and continue to think more about that and what that looks like. One other thing about the living wage, just another idea that popped into my head is if perhaps it leads to priority access if the applications for aid exceed the amount of funding that is available or something like that. I'm not sure. Finally, in Mr. Crowley's presentation, he mentioned these kind of phases that we're thinking about. I believe it's looking at my notes, response, recover, and thrive being kind of this longer term, 6 to 24 month and beyond rebuilding of the economy. And I just wanted I kind of flagged this issue in email questions, but wanted to mention it here as well, which is that I think we'd be remiss not to be using this moment to think about how to rebuild in a better way and not return to business as usual. So maybe that Thrive planning group that's looking more at long-term recovery and policy solutions, maybe that becomes the better avenue to have that conversation about, paying living wages and how to enhance protections for workers and encourage, greater equity in business models, whether it's ownership structures or others. And I wondered too, if because perhaps there will be more policy solutions, some of which may be legislative, if it would be a good idea to have a council member as a member of that planning subgroup. Since it's a little more policy focused potentially. That could be someone from the Sustainable Development Committee, perhaps the chair. So just an idea that I'd like to flag there as well. I think that's it for me. I just want to say thank you again to the entire working group for a really impressive amount of work that's gone into the effort so far. Thank you.
You're here.
Thank you, members of the committee. Ms. Cooper-Smith, did you have a comment?
No, I was saying thank you, that's all.
Oh, good. Okay. Just some final comments from me too. We heard a fair amount about distribution of the report, and I would echo the need for that. These are unusual times, and these are unprecedented times in most of our lifetimes. So thank you to everyone for the flexibility and the patience with which they're approaching this. I do want to applaud this group. I do want to share that from my perspective, we are, if I'm understanding correctly, still looking at an appropriation ordinance vote potentially as soon as April 8th. And I would not, for myself, feel comfortable voting on an appropriation ordinance unless we saw a report that was fairly far along first. So I understand that tomorrow we may see version 2. My hope is that we could perhaps see version 3 by the end of the week, and then 4 certainly before we vote. So I would offer that thought. So anything else for the good of the order, Councilmember Volan?
Yeah, is this document something that council is voting on? You're talking about vote on the appropriation ordinance that would
That's a
fund
great
the
question. That's a great question. Council will only vote on the appropriation ordinance, but particularly because we have fiscal responsibility and fiscal oversight, one of the greatest concerns I have is what is our structure for administering the $2 million that we've asked for? And I can vote with much more confidence if I have more detail on that.
Understood. Thank you. So, but most council members are going to be seeing this report for the first time tomorrow, and it is not even likely to be version 3, as Mr. Crowley has said. He's not sure that they're going to be able to turn around version 3 in time. So, I mean, this report was made available to this committee, to myself, Councilmember Flaherty, you, and Councilmember Sandberg. In addition to it being needed to be circulated to the media, it needs to go to the other council members, because version 3 is probably not going to be ready by tomorrow, and they wouldn't have a chance to read it, even if it was.
Right. I understand that version 3 may not come till later this week or even early next week. I would just offer that it's critical, I think, to have that before any vote on an appropriation ordinance.
Well, I agree, but I mean, they're going to get presented it tomorrow. Like with the media, I think the other members should have access to the second draft ASAP. So can I ask you to forward it since you received it as the chair?
Certainly.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Anything else for the good of the order? Okay, Councilmember Flaherty.
Just a small correction. I think the 9th is what I heard. April 9th would be the earliest we could vote on the appropriations ordinance based on the public notice. So we may have to schedule a special session on a Thursday if that's what we want to do. Up is down right now. So Zoom meeting, maybe we could do that. Perhaps I'm wrong. That's what I think I heard though on the date. So just wanted to flag that because I think you said the 8th just now. Perhaps Mr. Lucas wants to weigh in.
I believe the notice for the appropriation ordinance went out in the paper on March 28th. 10 days from that is April the 7th, which is when we're currently scheduled. And if we did want to change that, I think Alex, I didn't quite catch everything that you were talking about with April the 9th and the importance of that date, but I don't think we could move the appropriation ordinance to that date, given that the notice that went out on March 28th listed April 7th as the date of our public hearings. So there's a lot of moving pieces and we were trying to move quickly on that. So April 7th is going to be the date. If we wanted to change it, we'd have to post another notice in the paper and it'd be 10 days after that. So.
Okay, I stand corrected. Thank you. I think that got miscommunicated somewhere along the line.
We should just double check all of those dates just to make sure. I was reacting with what I'd heard, and so it's just worth really digging in. We don't shoot ourselves in the foot accidentally on that.
Yeah.
Councilmember Volin.
Parliamentary point, Mr. Lucas, couldn't we, if we needed to, while meeting on the 7th, during that meeting, decide to postpone or continue the meeting to a later date? Was what we do with budget hearings and we did with the UDO, where we didn't actually adjourn the meeting. We recessed or continued it so that it was one notional meeting. If for some reason on the 7th, people are not ready to vote, the members should have the ability to postpone to a later date. I don't see why that would require new notice. As long as we met on the 7th, we don't necessarily have to decide on the 7th.
You may be right, and Alex is also correct that it's worth double checking all this before we get to that point. And I was also getting a phone call from Dan as we were speaking. So I don't know if Dan Sherman, he's on the meeting here. I've unmuted him if he's got anything to add.
He's not unmuted.
Give me a second.
But I mean, we've done this before. There's precedent for it. I don't think that the notice requirement hamstrings us from having to make the decision on April 7th. We want to do so because we want to expedite the matter. But if for some reason Mr. Crowley doesn't feel comfortable, with us making the decision until the 9th, we have the mechanism to delay the final decision without having to advertise all over again. I'm quite confident of that.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Dan.
Yeah. Councilmember Volan is correct. There is a means to postpone action. What in effect we'd be doing is having our public hearing on Tuesday, April 7th. We met our statutory obligation, and there are means for us to postpone it. So, yeah.
That's what I thought. Mr. Crowley?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I mean, there's nothing magical in my mind about April 9th as some date other than just making sure that we run the clock out fully and legally on the 10 days and whatever that date is. I was just more flagging the issue of not sure. We should just be sure we're doing, we got the dates exactly right, I guess.
Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
again, I just reiterate, Ms. Skimblary, if you would circulate the draft that was sent to the committee on our behalf after this meeting, I think everyone would appreciate it.
Absolutely. So, and everyone, the entire council has seen a summary. I will go ahead and forward this draft after this meeting, and Mr. Lucas, I'll include you in that. Could you please add this to the packet for tomorrow's meeting? And
Absolutely.
when do you think that could be done? Could that be done this evening, do you think?
Within 15 minutes of when you send it to me.
Problem solved. I don't have that power, so thank you for that. So anything else for Councilmember Flaherty?
Yeah, just one more quick reminder that I would encourage changing that version you're going to send to say draft, in large letters across it, and also maybe a cover page clarifying that certain things in that, many things in that document will change, and in fact, some are already sort of irrelevant. So, because
it's a PDF, I don't know who has the Word file or whatever original. If you would.
Well, so just so you know, it's already marked as draft, so I don't think we need to do that. I think the current preamble to it.
You're right. Yeah.
Has a kind of qualifier that this is a initial recommendation. So I think as it stands right now, it probably is, just in the interest of getting it out there, it's probably.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I see it.
Great. Thank you. Okay. Any other comments before we close?
Move to adjourn.
Do I have a second?
Second.
The only other person. Thank you, council members. Thank you, everyone. We will see many of you back tomorrow evening.
See you tomorrow. Good night, everybody.
Adjourned.
Thanks all.